Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a whole bunch of recent news reports all centered around President Trump. These are from early May 2025.
Right. We've got pieces from places like Ross Story, The Daily Beast, HuffPost, Salon, The Hill, Reuters, CNN, and The New Republic. Quite a mix.
Exactly. And our goal here is to kind of sift through all these different accounts, pull out the main threads, and hopefully give you a clear sense of some key issues and, well, controversies.
Yeah, it's a really interesting snapshot. Different angles, different takes on his recent statements, his actions. We want to, connect some dots for you, maybe add a bit of context.
Okay, let's get into it. One thing that jumped out immediately was about comments President Trump made in an NBC interview, specifically about Representative Jasmine Crockett.
Yes. He called her a low IQ person.
Which is quite a statement.
It is. Very personal, very direct, and it brings up this whole idea of using intelligence, or perceived intelligence, as a political attack.
And Representative Crockett, she responded pretty forcefully on X, didn't she?
Oh, absolutely. She called the president diabolical, delusional, demented, dumb Don. Yeah, didn't mince words. And she also pointed to her own credentials and honorary doctorate, giving a commencement speech.
So a very sharp exchange there. And then Trump seemed to double down, saying IQ politics is real. What do you make of that specific phrase?
Well, it suggests he believes judging political figures based on perceived IQ is, I guess, fair game.
Yeah.
Or maybe even a necessary part of the political landscape now.
Yeah.
It's a framing that definitely draws attention.
And tied into this, or perhaps running parallel, are these other reports raising concerns about the president's own cognitive health?
Right. Timothy O'Brien over on MSNBC, he brought up this idea that Trump might be worried, sort of lives in fear, of experiencing cognitive decline like his father, Fred Trump.
Fred Trump had dementia and Alzheimer's, the reports mentioned.
Yes. And O'Brien pointed to things he's observed, like maybe slurring words sometimes, looking tired, signs of aging, he suggested, that might be amplified by this family history concern.
And it wasn't just pundits. There was a comment from his nephew, Fred C. Trump III.
That's right. He apparently told People magazine that he sees parallels between his grandfather's decline and the president's current state, which, coming from a family member, adds a different layer.
It does. The reports give some background, too. Fred Trump Sr. diagnosed at 85, but apparently still going into the office until he was 93.
Yeah, that context is interesting. It sort of paints a picture of late-onset issues within the family, which naturally fuels the speculation we're seeing now about the president. Important to stress, these are observations, reported opinions.
Of course, but the family history element makes it stickier, perhaps.
Definitely.
Okay, now for something, well, completely different. President Trump's announcement on Truth Social about Alcatraz.
Ah, yes. Rebuilding and reopening an enlarged Alcatraz. That's certainly made waves.
To house America's most ruthless and violent offenders, and he called it a symbol of law, order, and justice.
Right. Now, Alcatraz, as most people know, it closed down way back in 1963. It's a huge tourist attraction now, part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Gets over 1 million visitors a year, generates significant money.
So turning it back into a supermax prison, it's a dramatic idea.
Very.
Yeah.
And the reactions were, well, mostly critical. Nancy Pelosi said it's not a serious one.
And the practicalities seem daunting. The cost estimates are huge, right?
Astronomical. Hundreds of millions, maybe $235 to $370 million just for the restoration and rebuilding, and then another $40 to $60 million every year to operate it.
Wow. Plus, you'd lose all that tourism money, potentially $60 million annually, according to one source. And what about the environment? It's a bird habitat.
All valid points raised by critics. And it's kind of ironic because Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy closed it precisely because it was so expensive to run, housed relatively few inmates, and wasn't even escape-proof. So reopening it ignores the original reasons for closing it.
There was also that little detail, a suggestion about where the idea might have come from.
Yeah, the Clint Eastwood movie, Escape from Alcatraz. Apparently it aired in Palm Beach around the time Trump made the announcement. So speculation is, Maybe that sparked the idea.
A policy proposal inspired by a late-night movie. Interesting thought.
It certainly adds a curious wrinkle to the story. Raises questions about, the policymaking process sometimes.
Let's shift gears a bit, look internationally. Several sources are talking about what they call a global rejection of Trumpism.
Right. They're pointing to election results, like Labour winning in Australia, again, someone described as Trump-like.
Yeah.
Liberals winning in Canada under Mark Carney, who specifically promised to resist Trump.
And in Germany.
And in Germany, the far-right AfD apparently underperformed expectations, even though they got endorsements from people like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
The argument is that other democracies are sort of pulling back from that style of politics.
And how are the sources defining Trumpism in this context?
Generally, it seems to mean that blend of economic nationalism, seeing foreign relations as very transactional, like other countries are ripping off America, as one article puts it, and that populist leadership style.
So actions like threatening to annex Canada or Greenland or imposing tariffs fit into that view.
Exactly. Those are used as examples of policies that strain alliances and reflect that America first transactional approach that, according to these analyses, other countries are now reacting against.
The situation with the AfD in Germany seems particularly noteworthy, too. German intelligence actually designated them a far-right extremist organization.
Yes, and that designation itself caused ripples, drawing comments from the U.S. Secretary of State and the Vice President. It shows how interconnected things are. A domestic German issue becomes an international talking point.
And some sources connect all of this to the idea of the U.S. becoming more isolated, a pariah nation, one article suggested.
That's the argument some are making, yeah. That these strained relationships and the perception of the U.S. pulling back from traditional alliances contribute to that feeling of isolation on the world stage.
Okay, staying with interactions, there was also this reported incident on Air Force One involving the Wall Street Journal.
Ah, right. A reporter asked about potential talks with Vladimir Putin regarding the war in Ukraine, and apparently President Trump reacted quite angrily.
Calling the Wall Street Journal a rotten newspaper and China-oriented.
Yes, familiar lines of attack against media outlets he sees as critical. It fits a pattern we've seen before.
And it's interesting because the Wall Street Journal, while often seen as conservative-leaning, has published some pretty critical stuff about Trump, especially his trade policies, hasn't it?
It has. They've definitely voiced concerns, particularly on the economic front. So the criticism isn't necessarily coming from a purely partisan place, but perhaps from specific disagreements on policy and its effects. The source mentioned their past description of his trade approach as the dumbest trade war in history.
Right, that highlights the tension there. So, pulling back a bit, what are the broader themes or criticisms about his leadership style that emerge from this collection of articles?
Well, some describe him as intellectually unstable, suggesting a lack of deep thinking or consistency. There are mentions of policies being poorly thought through, childish and non-workable. Strong language.
What kind of examples do they give for that?
They point to seeming contradictions, like advocating for free speech but also cracking down on dissent, or promising lower consumer prices while enacting policies like tariffs they're expected to do the opposite.
The Ukraine situation, too. Claiming to want peace, but taking positions seen as maybe favoring Russia.
That's mentioned as well. Also, his energy policy pushing fossil fuels while also talking about bringing manufacturing back, which some argue conflicts with clean energy trends needed for modern industry.
And the impact on science. There was a worrying statistic mentioned.
Yeah, one report cited a survey suggesting 75% of scientists polled were considering leaving the U.S. because of funding cuts and the general climate. That raises long-term concerns about innovation, obviously.
So the overall picture painted is one of, well, maybe inconsistency, controversial proposals, and strained relationships, both domestically and internationally.
I think that's a fair summary of what these specific reports from early May are conveying. Questions about cognitive fitness, policy decisions like Alcatraz, the global reaction, media clashes, and these broader critiques of his approach.
It's a lot to take in from just a few days' worth of news.
It really is. It shows how many different fronts are active at once.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've touched on the president's comments and cognitive state concerns, that really surprising Alcatraz idea, the shifting international view of Trumpism, his clash with the Wall Street Journal, and these wider criticisms of his leadership and policies. As always, remember this is based specifically on the articles we looked at today.
Exactly. It's a snapshot, a distillation of those particular sources from that specific time. Each topic could be a whole deep dive on its own, really.
True. Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about all the debates around leadership, how policy gets made, America's place in the world, what bigger questions does this raise for you? Maybe something to chew on, explore further, based on what we've talked about today.